Without further ado, I would like to welcome to the stage a collection, a panel of industry behemoths to talk around the role of publishing and programmatic and publishing and digital and where we are as an industry. So who should we go with first? Let's go with our Global Sales Director from Financial Times, Dominic Good. Please come to the stage. Just give him a round of applause. Where should we go now? Let's go to Jim Freeman, who is the Global Sales and Trading Director for the Daily Telegraph. So, welcome guys to this panel, this lovely intimate venue in the shooting gallery.
This is very intimate. Thank you very much.
Hopefully that's warmed you guys up and we're all ready to go. I suppose the key thing for me really, and the first question to really set the kind of context of where we want to go, is how to, from a traditional publisher's point of view, how are you kind of keeping up with today's consumer? How are you keeping up with the way they move and ensuring that your brands are tech savvy?
Wow. So, I mean, our audience is pretty unique, and I'm not sure that we necessarily see our view across the landscape of consumers as such. We're very much in the, as you know, the FT audience is a senior enterprise CEO type C-suite audience, so we really speak to corporate branding budgets mainly, and then on the flip side of that, it's very high value luxury goods. That's mostly our client base. So within that small segment of the consumer marketplace, if that is a consumer marketplace, we find most of our relationships with advertisers are direct. And it's all about targeting very scarce and hard to get people. And we have a fantastic advantage, I think, over many other media owners in that we have a direct relationship with our readers. Over 50% of the FT audience has a subscription relationship with us. So we know an awful lot about who those people are. So technology doesn't really play a huge role for us in terms of identifying where people are because we've got all that data. And we have all that data and we bring that to bear for our advertisers direct.
And is that a similar situation at Telegraph?
I guess we're slightly different because we've got a much broader audience. Who'd have thought that 90 million users across the world wouldn't be big enough? In our day and age, but so you know, we used to have an extremely successful business as a newspaper, and we used to reach around 3 million people. We now, as I say, reach around 90 million, and I guess technology for us has changed journalism. It's changed the way that we do things. Whereas in the past, the editor's gut feel, I guess, was probably the best gauge of what we would put in a newspaper and what content we would put in our products. Now technology plays a big part in what people are reading, what they're enjoying, how long it stays on the front page or the portal page, etc., etc. So technology is huge in terms of how we now produce our products, and technology is clearly very important now in terms of the growing part of our business, which is digital.
And interestingly, you both mentioned data. How are you using that data, and how effectively do you think you're using it? You know, how's this affected you guys so far? How are you looking to get around it? Do you see it, like we were saying in the trends, as an opportunity to produce even greater content?
I think opportunity is probably it is an opportunity, absolutely, because I think it's going to clear up a lot of the issues that we have in digital. I think it is a massive hurdle that we all need to get over, advertisers and media owners. But ad blocking currently for us, about 12% of our site is ad blocked, and it has been for a while. We're not seeing that any real growth there currently. I'm sure it will now with Apple allowing it into their store. But you know, ad blocking is here because the industry has been pretty irresponsible over the years in terms of the ads they put out. A lot of sites, how many ads they've got on their site. And how interruptive some of those ads are. So this is a kind of wake-up call in terms of creativity. You mentioned it earlier. I find it surprising actually that in most traditional media, the kind of skills have been honed over years in terms of the time and effort that's put into the creativity for a TV ad, for instance, or a newspaper ad. It's also honed in terms of how that ad is placed. Has to be centre break of Downton Abbey, or European football, or front half of the newspaper, or drive time in radio. And yet when it comes to digital, that effort isn't there yet. And I think if it had have been, I think, you know, consumers actually enjoy ads if they're creatively very good and they make sense in the environment they're in. And I think we're at this stage now because people haven't been thinking in that way. So yes, we need to clear that up. Publishers need to clear their sites up. And we're doing a huge migration at the moment, changing our site. I mean, our site's pretty good anyway. It's good for viewability, better than most, and it's good in terms of the amount of ads on a page. There aren't that many, but there are some sites out there that have 10, 12 ads on their page, and that's the kind of stuff that has led to ad blocking.
And not just ads on a page either. I mean, I don't know if anybody here has installed Ghostery on your browser. But if you have, and you look at certain websites, you can find 40, 50 different lines of code being stuck onto ads, which is, I mean, it's just, I think, personally, I think the data and the privacy angle is driving ad blocking, certainly in places like Germany and France, as much as the creative execution problem. I think I was a bit disappointed to hear Nick Bourne from Maxis saying that he thought that the whole ad blocking issue is a publisher issue. To me, the publishers are certainly one of the victims of it, but not the causes of it. I think advertisers are also victims of it because audiences, you will be losing audiences for campaigns, and we're seeing, even at the FT, a significant incidence of ad blocking. Certainly claimed. I mean, we about 30% of our audience claim to use computers with ad blocking installed on it, which is a huge number. I mean, that's huge. Well, I think actually it's translated into about 8% of inventory that's being blocked, so it's not a problem yet, but I can see if we were here in a year's time, I think that would be a problem, and it certainly would be a problem for audiences, or, you know, publishers like us, which are very, very scarce and discrete and niche audiences. I think the user experience has been pretty terrible for a lot of websites, and because of the creative executions that are being pushed into inappropriate content. And I think underlying that is probably advertisers don't think enough about it because it's a cheap thing to buy. Digital has been traditionally cheap, so why bother doing too much to create fantastic advertising experiences? And why bother really thinking too much about the context in which those ads are served? And I think that's the other thing which, through ad blocking, I think it's a huge opportunity for us all to think again about the message and the medium working together to create something enriching for users. And that's not been part of the digital discussion, I think, for far too long.
And interesting, you mentioned the kind of creativity and people being lazy and not putting as much effort into the kind of digital side. Do you think, you mentioned two reasons there, obviously one, people understand. Do you think education is still a key knowledge, or the fact that perhaps digital is not as mature as it should be? What do you think is that kind of reason as to why people aren't putting as much significance previously? Obviously they are now.
Well, sorry.
No.
Well, I mean, I think it's the origin of where digital comes from, which is it's been a very response-led medium. It's been about click-through rates and, you know, the cost of a lead or the cost of an acquisition. And so as long as the price is right for that formula to work, and that's been the problem, is that the price has been pushed down successively, and programmatic's played its part in that as well. Let's not forget that. So I think if you're not paying very much for the inventory, you're not going to put a lot of effort into it. And if you're paying a lot for a Super Bowl ad at half-time, you'll put a lot of effort into what that ad will look like. It's as simple as that.
Always reminds me of my kids when they were just learning to walk, and I don't know if anyone's got kids, and at that very young age, when they first take that very first step, they think they can run, they keep falling over, and you can't run until you can walk. And I think what we've kind of missed out in this race is getting the basics right. And agencies, procurement, Doesn't help agencies either, because they're having to buy things cheaper. But I think in digital, I think all of the focus and all the talk is about data and tech. And everyone forgets that actually digital is no different to any other media. The rules are the same in terms of communicating and engaging with an audience. The rules are the same in terms of the creativity and the context and the environment you're in. The tech is and the data is really clever. That kind of overlays on the top and can make it even more pinpoint. But we're going for that first rather than actually getting the basics right. And I think we will. We're seeing advertisers and agencies now starting to kind of sit back and think, okay, how could this work better? Because of all the problems we've seen here. It's such a massive environment in terms of the inventory that is out there and the environments that people can buy into, that people are starting to now think, okay, we really do need to think about the placement of our ads, and the tech can make that even better. But we've got to get that right first.
Yeah, I'm sorry to sound a little depressing, but I have to say, I think I can see a very, very troubled future for standard display digital advertising. I think unless you're having a direct relationship with an audience and speaking to an audience in a way that engages them, and to your point, I think you've got to give them some utility, you've got to entertain them, you've got to be engaging, you've got to do something more than just flashing an ad to a human who fits a target identity that you're trying to go for on any kind of website. I think those kinds of days are going to be very difficult. And I met I'm going to sound very old here, I met a young chap the other day who's doing effectively my job at a small website called The Tab. Brilliant, go and have a look at it. I think the tab.com has got some really interesting ideas about how they see the development of their website. And he's 21, 22 perhaps, he's an ex-student. The Tab is a website that is about student life at sort of Russell Group universities, and they've got a network of reporters, if you will, all students, and they have decided not to run advertising on their site at all. There will be no advertising on the tab.com, and that mainly because their audience is very mobile. It's mainly smartphones that people access that site, and advertising slows the experience. It's a poor user experience for their audience, so they've decided they won't go down the traditional spots and dots route. They won't have any data, they won't have any of those, those 50, 60 lines of code I mentioned earlier, none of that. And instead they're going straight for native executions, and they're working with brands to create something engaging for their audience in a way that enriches the life of that audience, and they're working directly with the brands. And they're fantastic brands. I mean, I'm sure there are probably people here in this room who've worked with them. Eon was one, and Aviva is another. I mean, really high street brands. Talking to a student body. Now, I think that is a way for the future for publishers, because you're working with brands directly to give something which is enriching to the audience, and that makes sense to everybody.
I think we've got to think carefully about the quality of that content. There's a lot of agencies are now starting to make content, and there are other independent agencies now starting up offering that kind of content. We believe that with 150 years experience of writing engaging content, that we have some experts in that field, and it's certainly something we're seeing people come to us towards. We've got to be careful that the whole internet isn't all branded content, because it just wouldn't make sense and wouldn't work. But just ensure it's quality and it's engaging. But it's certainly a massive growth area and can work.
Yeah, I don't want to say there won't be any advertising.
No.
I mean, I think it will obviously be a mixed economy, as you say. But I think there'll be a balancing. I think there'll be a growth of branded content,
Definitely.
native, whatever, because people like to read it, and if it's done well, it adds something to the experience. Having said that, I mean, it's a small part of what we do. We've been very reticent, and we've stepped back and watched it develop. We're certainly not a first mover in native at all. And in fact, we've probably only really dipped our toes in it in the last well, certainly the last year, really, I would say. Although, having said that, we've been working with brands to create sponsored content, which is completely independent of brands, for years, and we've been doing that for 20-odd years. So we've got a lot of experience in that. It's where it becomes tricky for a brand like certainly the FT and the Telegraph and others, is where you've got client-voiced. I make a distinction between FT-voiced editorial, which is our stuff, we write it, it's completely independent of the advertiser. The advertiser sponsors it, that's about it. We might agree on what the topic should be, but beyond that, it's all our stuff. And then client-voiced stuff, and I think that's the true native stuff, is where the client is speaking with, or the advertiser is speaking with his or her voice. And you've got to be careful with that, because trust is at the heart of the contract between our reader and the brand, our brand. So we're helping clients write better stuff through giving them insights into what our readers want, and then helping them to ensure that the quality is there for the reader, but being very clear to the reader that this is stuff provided directly from that advertiser, and it's all about the labelling, we believe. Yeah. It's all about the labelling. And I think you mentioned the word education. I think your question was more about educating advertisers. I think we've got, as publishers, we've got a huge job to do to educate our readers what the advertising experience is going to be and what the implicit contract is, if you're a reader, with the advertising. So I think on the one side, for traditional ads, we've got to get to an acceptable ads charter. You know, what is an acceptable experience for readers? You know, animation loops which go on and on, for example, are, I think, increasingly resisted by readers. So we've got to have an acceptable ads charter, and part of that is being very clear to readers what it is they're reading, if it's in the native or branded content area. And advertisers don't always like that, because they like to blur the line, and for us it's very clear what we say, that this is from an advertiser, and we hold that very, very dear.
Interestingly, they kind of mentioned authenticity and trust as well, which is obviously a big thing. With these kind of new kids on the block, you know, Amazon not being new, but from a media perspective and getting involved in it from that side, how relevant now is authenticity and trust as opposed to the way that the content is delivered? So you have things like Vice, you have BuzzFeed, who are, you know, 90% of their content is native or branded content, if you like. How important is the trust and authenticity, and how do you still kind of keep up to date with a millennial reader, if you like, and bringing in that next generation as opposed to these delivery platforms?
Well, again, I think it's really interesting what's happening with the kind of the three big ones, I would say, that are trying to dominate mobile at the moment: Google, Apple, and Facebook. And it's really interesting that what they need and what they want, and all of the debate at the moment is over our content. They want us on their new platforms, and that's who they're talking to. They're not talking to Vice and BuzzFeed as the primary content providers. And I think that's good for us. So there's lots of debate whether we should be giving up our content in that respect. They're still our pages, it's still our content, and we're still able to monetize it. And I think it's interesting because they are huge distributors, and if we're on their platforms, then our content will get wider distribution. I think it's a better environment on some of those platforms for advertisers as well, within that content, than the wider, I guess, Facebook kind of landscape. So it's interesting. I think our content is in demand at the moment. And all the talk has been before about the size of the audiences on these three big platforms. And I think now the debate is about that content. Now, there's a place absolutely for Vice, BuzzFeed, etc., etc. But I think the real trusted environments, that's the debate that's happening at the moment with those three partners.
Really, it's just, what's the future for the distributed content strategy? And it's early days, and we're not really involved in a lot of that yet, and we're looking at it. Our early experience was with content available through Flipboard, for example. So that's been around for some time. The experience was pretty poor, I think, for us. Not much content actually consumed that way. I mean, you can set it up and you can have the whole ft.com experience through Flipboard if you want. Do people do it? They don't really. They come directly to the site, and when they come to our site, they tend to engage much more deeply. So I think there's a place for it. I think, you know, as you say, it's about engaging with new audiences who are not already our customers. And so from that point of view, it's quite a good. I think it'll play a role for us in terms of reaching new people, but it'll be a snacking environment. They won't go to. I don't believe our long-term audience will be on Facebook consuming ft.com. They might be on Facebook consuming one or two, and that will lead into a direct relationship with us over time. But I don't think that'll be the primary distribution point for us.
And with you guys, in terms of your inventory, obviously, is playing a role? Yeah,
absolutely. And big investment again in terms of the tech there and our people. It's only, we actually put every single piece of our inventory into programmatic, so everyone can bid for it. The reality is that the majority of our business is direct. Around 10% currently is via programmatic, so actually bought via programmatic. It can compete with direct, but that is growing. And programmatic, I guess, falls into it's automated trading, so you have the kind of bidding on programmatic. Even that splits into open and private marketplace. Our biggest growth area is private marketplace rather than open. But what we're also seeing is a move towards more direct business being automated. So no bidding, just that kind of end-to-end automation of the trade. Again, that's the direction of travel, and that will continue. I think it's really important that, and I think someone mentioned it earlier, that people are involved in that. Chris, you mentioned that actually, you know, you're still a people business, and I think that's really important in the future. And it goes back to getting the basics right. Computers will never know. They can be very clever in terms of targeting and the data, but that human contact in terms of what are the real objectives of you guys, the clients, what do you really want to achieve? Having that kind of dialogue will make it better for you and for us.
Well, programmatic for us is a small part of what we do. We don't sell a lot of inventory via programmatic. And that's mainly because our floor prices are way above where the market currently is. I mean, the bid density for programmatic is probably in the single pounds, and our floor prices start in this 30 to 40 pounds. So we're not winning many bids, and we don't want to win many bids at the £2 to £3. We want to win campaigns at 30, 40, and in some cases even higher. So it's a part of what we do, and all our inventory is available. It's not a price discussion; it's a channel discussion. If you want to buy it programmatically, fill your boots. But the price has to be comparable to what we would do on a direct basis with an advertiser. I think I'm really excited about programmatic technology because I think it opens up new products. So I think audience extension, very, very interesting. We're doing a lot around audience extension, so targeting FT readers on other people's platforms. We only work with a small number of other media brands because we still think environment is important. So audience, we call it Audience Plus, but everybody's got their own audience extension products, I'm sure, and that's a programmatic product. Alliances, we're working with The Guardian and others, The Economist and CNN in something called Pangea. That's a programmatic application, enables a number of publishers to work together. It's interesting. And then I think automation. I think that's really, we have a long tail of very small orders, and we can't grow our business if our ad operations team has to grow in sync with that long tail of advertisers. So we're going to be moving over the next couple of years very hard into automating and giving a front end directly to clients, actually, as well as trading desks and agencies and so on. But I think that's where programmatic can really play a role for publishers.
Okay, I'm conscious we're running to time, but one more minute. So that gives us one question from the audience, because I'm sure you have a question, just to make sure you're interacting before the end of the session. If you've got a burning question you'd like to ask the panel, you're only going to see all three of them together in one place here. Come on. Yes.
Who do you think has to move first when we're talking about generating a better experience for consumers? Is it going to be the publishers who wipe the slate clean and come up with one really engaging format that's available for sale and take the revenue hit that goes with it? Or is it going to be the agencies who say we're willing to pay more and we're willing to do more interesting things? Because it seems like a great idea, a great utopia, but unless there's a cartel of publishers that do it at the same time, it seems like a pretty risky operation. And if that doesn't change, then what incentive is there for the agencies to do anything more creative?
Good question.
I guess that debate's happening at the moment. I think publishers are already ahead of the game in terms of their sites are a lot cleaner than the rest of the web. And a lot of publishers are looking at that and still developing and changing that. We are looking at formats, but again, it's really difficult to bring out a format and you're the only one that has that format. You guys aren't going to invest in that. It has to be a wider, and this is I guess where I'm looking towards the industry bodies to, and this is half the problem with digital, is that the industry body, there is no real consensus on anything in digital, whether it be viewability, whether it be ad blocking, and the industry bodies, because there's so many different companies on those in those bodies, including some of the biggest we've talked about today, who have a different agenda completely. It's very difficult for them to have consensus, but we need consensus. So I'm not really answering your question, who is it, chicken or egg? But I think everyone will do this, because I think advertisers want to advertise on digital. I think it's a great environment. We've already talked about the data and the tech that will enable to make it even better to overlay great ads and content. So I think we'll all be doing this over the next few months. It's a shame it's got it's a little bit like the horse has bolted. It's a shame we've got to where we are, because we've known the creativity in digital has not been good enough. But look, we're going to do our bit. We're obviously, part of this is to try and educate the audience as well about why advertising are on content sites and are needed. You either can pay for the content. That's kind of proved that doesn't really work for the majority. It works for some of the more niche products, more targeted products. So it's a long-winded way of saying I don't know. Anyone else know?
Dominic or Ryan, want to add anything to that before we wrap up?
It is the $1 million question. It's the $1 million question, you know. But I was at an ISBA event last week talking about this. An ISBA were talking about it, and look, I think publishers have a responsibility clearly to their audience, and that's what we're going through now. And we're working on a draft. I'm not ready to go public with it, but we are thinking about what is permissible and what is not at the FT, and what are we going to take and what won't we accept. And I think we have to stand by. I think that has to be the first point, is that as a publisher, as an individual publisher, as a group of publishers, we have to get to a point where we stand by what we think is the right thing to do by your audience, and then not accept stuff which is going to piss your readers off. I mean, that's an obvious thing to do. But Bob Wootton at ISBA said that, and I think he's right, is that, you know, if you want to have change has to start at the top. And the top of the pyramid are the advertisers, because it's their money. And I think advertisers have to get with the programme on this as well and start demanding higher standards. Particularly, I think there's probably a bifurcation here. There'll be a direct response type environment, and then there's a branding environment. And we've got to start thinking about brand metrics for understanding the performance of those sorts of ads, which means you're probably using fewer platforms, because you can't do a brand metric study across 5,000 websites, but you can across 10. And I think what we're going to see as digital for branding purposes increases, it's still a small part of the display market, but if that grows, we have to be working on brand metrics, and that speaks to creativity, it speaks to good quality.
The majority of audience for us is on mobile web. Our app is growing, it's pretty big now. The one thing I will say about the app versus web environment is people spend 30 minutes on our app, and the web is a completely different experience. So it's more like the traditional read of a newspaper with that engagement. So it's a great environment. It's a lot more glossy, I think, than the web in general. So it's a great environment for advertisers, and ad blockers find it a lot more difficult, and viewability is a lot higher. Yeah. And I'm putting my price up, by the way, 60 quid.
Yeah, I was going to say. But what a great panel. Give it a round of applause, please. Right.
Cheers.
And Dominic, thank you.
Well done. Cheers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. So, where's we got the thing? In one of your hands? No, I need the remote. The remote? Oh, we can announce the panel now. For me, what you heard there is a fundamental truth around what programmatic is and what programmatic isn't. And it's part of the maturity of the industry. Because, as I said at the beginning, programmatic is a great way of marrying audiences and data to really address the audience component. But advertising is about content, environment, and creativity. Now, at Exchange Lab, over the last 12 months, we've seen a lot more brand buys in our environment, which has meant that we deliver native and we deliver private marketplaces in a programmatic way, but with a very close eye on the environment into which that advertising is going, because the relationship for that brand with the environment is a core component of a branding message to a consumer. And so, in the way that television used to buy, or still does, buys lots of direct response at night time, the development out of the long tail into premium inventory has necessitated the fact that this is an advertising business. And programmatic is not a universal press the button and forget it. And if your partner isn't really caring about environment or caring about where your brand appears, then you've got the wrong partner. Because I think as this moves forward, this is a major part of what we do in the programmatic industry. It's about the fact that you need the heavy lifting of programmatic, but you mustn't forget that we're still in a media and advertising business, and that there's some elements there in terms of real people that are absolutely key. So I think it's fascinating to see the sort of quandary, and I was at BBC.com, as some of you know, before, and we had the same issues, an advertising-led premium site that is sold as much on environment as it was on audience, or a marriage of both. Programmatic plays its part in that. And my one call to action, and I remember actually with Jeremy in Asia a year or so ago doing a speech around how creativity was lagging behind in the whole marketplace, and how the creative agencies were not engaged with what programmatic could do for them. Because actually, where we've had such great engagement, we've seen the ability to test creativity very effectively through the data that programmatic throws out. But ultimately, creativity drives the environment, drives the reaction, whether that's a head reaction or a click reaction of a consumer. And so far, if I was asking you as clients to do something, I would really rail in on your creative agencies to think about how they use the new opportunities to really get the creative right. Because if you don't, everything else doesn't matter. If the creativity is fundamentally not working, the environment might be right, the audience might be right, but it doesn't elicit the right reaction, whether that's a uplift of awareness or whether it's an actual action for both. So it's what we've heard there, I think, is a great dialogue around the maturity required in the business now that it's become mainstream. And a lot of that business that's being done in the US and the UK, that 70%, 60% penetration is now brand. It's native, it's private marketplaces. All those things are brought to bear by the Exchange Lab every day into the marketplace, but it has to be done responsibly. So it's an important point. Okay, so we'll take a couple of minutes to clear the plates, and then we'll move on to our second session.